We all know that effective internal communication is the secret to high-performing teams and companies. Did you know that according to a Tower Watson study, companies with effective employee communication tools see 47% higher total returns than businesses that communicate ineffectively? Beekeeper, a leader in employee communication, has developed an effective guide to help you understand your internal communications, especially if you work with a frontline team. Download Beekeeper's free guide today at www.beekeeper.io/crisis-averted-podcast. That's www.beekeeper.io/crisis-averted-podcast. Welcome to the Crisis Averted Podcast, produced by CJ Media Solutions. I'm your host, CJ Arlotta. In this episode, I speak with Jim Roddy, author, keynote speaker, and president of Jim Roddy CBA LLC. During our conversation, he discusses the walk-on method and how it can be used as a blueprint for professional success. Feel free to send me your feedback at cj@cjmediasolutionsllc.com. Thanks for listening. Jim, thanks for coming on the Crisis Averted podcast today.
CJ, thanks for having me. Nice to chat with you.
So for people who aren't familiar with you, Jim, mind sharing a little bit of your backstory, who you are and what you're up to now?
Sure, happy to do it. So I have been, my current role is with the Retail Solutions Providers Association. My titles are Vice President of Marketing. I also work as a business coach, serving members, and these are those who provide technology solutions in the retail, restaurant, and grocery verticals. So that's what I'm doing full time. I've been a business coach for a little bit over 4 years now. I've been in the IT sector for over 20 years. The first 17 plus of those were with Jameson Publishing. We were a technology magazine publisher, websites, produced events, and my last 11 years there, I was company president before I decided to go into coaching. I've also been a speaker and an author as well. My most recent book is called The Walk-On Method to Career and Business Success, a reprofile non-scholarship athletes from years ago, some of them 7 years ago, some of them 30, 40 years ago, and the lessons that they learned as a non-scholarship athlete playing on a scholarship team and how they applied those to their professional career. And it really sparked their success. So published that book in late 2020, and the feedback on that has been absolutely tremendous.
So what made you write that book?
Good question. There were a few driving factors. One was I'm passionate about sharing with folks like the real keys to success. And so you and I both have backgrounds in the technology, publishing, and media industry. And too often, the folks who are profiled either in a magazine or on a TV show or something, people look at them and they're profiled as what a genius or so lucky. And you just read them and you're like, well, that can't be me because I'm not a genius and I'm not lucky. I guess I'm not going to be able to get what I want. And so I know that that isn't the actual key to success. So I was always looking for an avenue to do that. And then actually I published another book in 2012 on hiring best practices. It's called Hire Like You Just Beat Cancer. I'm a 19-year colon cancer survivor. And when that book came out, it was kind of a lot of people in my, industry learning that I had cancer, because it's not exactly the topic you weave into a, conference call. How's everybody doing? Did you know 5 years ago I had cancer? That kind of thing. And so when people heard about that, they said, oh, now I know why you're so driven. I can specifically remember that somebody saying that to me at a conference at a very nice tropical location. And I politely said, thank you. But I thought, well, that's not really what drives me. So I just started examining what really does drive me. And I realized that I attack cancer and my professional career the same way that I approached my role as a walk-on back in the late 80s and early 90s at Gannett University, which was a small college basketball powerhouse. So I thought to myself, well, if that's what worked for me, like what are the elements of that? So I started writing those down, but then realized, I wanted to share this with people, but I thought people then could say to me, well, you're just lucky, right? It just worked out for you, but not for me. So I thought, well, what if I test my hypothesis and reach out to 5 walk-ons, 10 walk-ons, 15, and keep going and going. Well, I find out that their success as professionals, not professional athletes, but in the working world, as business owners, as lawyers, doctors, whatever path they chose, was that rooted in their walk-on experience. And I can tell you without a doubt, that was my philosophy, that was my hypothesis. And the answer to that question was an overwhelming, screaming at the top of its lungs, yes. So the book ends up being 31 walk-ons. One of them is me. So I profile, 30 other folks who were underdogs, and they became extraordinary because they learned how to properly channel their energy. So that's really the root of where the walk-on method to career and business success comes from.
Jim, what made you connect your experience as a walk-on to your success in your personal and professional life?
Good question. I think because I very much realized I didn't get by on my looks, my charm, or my genius, right? And so I was like, well, there's got to be something else. I went to Gannon University. I loved Gannon, still a big fan, made a lot of friends there. But it's not like the kind of diploma you can wave around and people are like, get everybody else out of the way. We got a Gannon man coming through. And so that was one element of it. The other thing is, the more that I got to peer in, when I was at Jameson Publishing, our lead magazine was Business Solutions Magazine. I got to engage with a lot of high-ranking executives at Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies. And the more up close you got with them and figured out what things work for them, you realize, oh, this is something that can be accomplished. It's not just lucky, right? Some people do, have fortune fall in their way, but there is definitely a path that you can make on your own. And so, once I saw that, I thought, boy, I really would like to teach this to people, especially those who are younger than me, who just think, well, it's not in the cards for me, nothing that I can do about it. But it is really the elements, the 5 steps that we map out in the walk-on method. Those are truly the keys to success, not just for me, but for anybody listening to this, and even those folks who aren't listening. There are key steps you can take to maximize your success and really achieve the dreams that you have from a career standpoint and business standpoint.
Yeah, and even if luck kind of finds you, right, you still have to maintain that success at some point.
Correct. Yeah, if you get a lucky break, that doesn't last for months, quarters, years, decades,
right,
by any means. So you have to continue to earn it every single day. And that really ties in with a walk-on mindset, right? We know a lot of athletes who had all sorts of potential, but to quote the great Al McGuire, potential means you haven't done anything yet, right? And so these athletes are anointed as they're going to be wonderful, they're going to be great, and then they kind of, you don't hear from them anymore. They end up being on the bench, or they end up being, out of the game at some point. But these walk-ons, they knew, because they were the person on the end of the bench for the most part, they were the non-scholarship person, that they had to earn it every single day. And if they didn't bring maximum effort, maximum preparation, if they didn't get there early, if they didn't try their best every single sprint in practice, not just during the games, then at any point the coach could make an example of them and say, you're not working hard enough, get out of here, and send a message to all the other players. So, that was one thing that I felt when I was a 4-year walk-on at Gannon, that at no point did I get comfortable thinking, yeah, I'm good, I can just coast from here on in. And that's really what you find in a lot of these walk-ons is and that was the interesting thing. I wrote the book over a period of 5 years. So there's some folks who I first interviewed, then I had to look them back up before I published the book to see, okay, half decade later, where are they? And they all continued to move forward. They all continued to work their tail off. So yeah, you're right. True sustainable success. And that's what the walk-on method is all about. It is sustainable success, not how to just make one great thing happen and then cross your fingers and hope it lasts for as long as it does.
Could you talk a little bit about the walk-on mindset and a little bit about the method, kind of break that down for us?
Sure, happy to do it. So there are 5 steps, and I could go into as much depth as you want, but I'll start with kind of an overview. So step number 1, we say take a big shot. Anybody can make a layup. And so what's behind that is, too oftentimes people sell themselves short when setting their next career-related goal, right? They say, I really want this, but that's going to be really hard. It might not happen, so I'm going to try to play it safe. But anybody can do that. But, we find out you've got to take that big shot. You have to set that big goal and go for it. And then how do you do that? So that ties in with step number 2. We say it's make a passion statement. So that's with a P, not with an F. So a passion statement. And so that means prepare with passion, practice with passion, and then play with passion, right? Everybody gets to see during the game everybody playing hard, but it's what happens before that. And too many people from a career standpoint, they wish that a dream's going to come true. And they say, if that moment ever presents itself, I'm really going to go for it. But you can't wish and you can't wait. You've got to walk on to your dream. And so we have stories in the book of folks who really put in extra preparation time, extra work when nobody was watching, and that helped them achieve their goals.
And
then
Jim, just to kind of get into the second step about passion, you hear
Sure.
that so often. You need to really have that passion to obtain that. What does passion mean to you, and how can people find their passion?
Good question. So your passion can't be dictated to you, right? You can't say you're passionate about this. So that's one of the guidelines from it. A lot of this you have to figure it out on your own. The other thing is, from a career and business standpoint, for the constraints of the book is it has to be something that's commercially acceptable, right? You can't say my passion is watching television. Well, nobody's going to pay you, to watch TV. And so you have to find a passion that, and here's one of the things that we really found in the book is that ties in with serving other people. If you are simply selfish about your goal and your goal is only self-serving, in the long run, it is not going to work out for you because you're always going to be putting yourself front and center. So a lot of these walk-ons who we talked with, I started realizing after doing about a half dozen interviews, boy, these are great examples of servant leadership. So I started asking them, this sounds a lot like servant leadership. Do you see it that way? And many of them were like, I never thought of it that way. Like, I love servant leadership, but yeah, that's exactly what I was doing. So I think that's something that you have to find something that you really want to do. And again, mine was to walk on at, my first dream was to walk on at Gannett University. Almost nobody else in the world, right, has that, dream at all. But that was my dream, and I did the things to accomplish that. It can be your dream. It doesn't have to follow anybody else's dream. But again, my recommendation is if you want to do something worthwhile, not just for yourself, not just making money, or not just doing this one thing that you like to do, then the more that it ties in with helping other people, the more valuable you're going to feel, the more driven you're going to be to accomplish it.
And the third step.
Yeah, third step ties in perfectly with, talking about crises. It's run uphill, and we say it takes longer, it makes you stronger. It's all about embracing obstacles. And so we're taught when we are confronted with an obstacle that we should seek the path of least resistance, right? Go around it, go over it, sit down and cry, run the other way, no obstacles, right? And so where run uphill comes from was, so I ran cross-country races when I was younger. And so everybody, when they would get to a hill, all the runners would slow down. Well, I started developing the philosophy, whether this is smart or insane, I'm not sure. It was in, the realm of both of them. I would sprint up the hill, right? And so these people would see, like, you're not supposed to sprint up a hill, right? That's when you slow down and kind of trudge up a hill. And so I would sprint by people. Not only did it move me up, they would look at me and be like, this dude's a psycho. Like, he has something that I don't. And that really helped me. So what I found out was, looking with all these walk-ons, I wasn't the only one running uphill. When they encountered an obstacle, they leaned into the difficulties and embraced those obstacles because they knew on the other end of the experience, they would definitely be battle tested. So, to the listeners and, to anybody who's, trying to apply this to their professional career, when you encounter a career challenge and you see everybody around you wishing the moment will pass them by, or they're looking for a volunteer and everybody starts stepping backwards, show that courage and jump headlong into the problem, convert it into an opportunity and a victory. It might not feel good, and that ties in with step 4, which we can get to whenever you want, but that's really something that you need to do, is not run away from obstacles, embrace them. How can you solve it? How can you learn from it and get better from it, you as an individual and your organization?
And when you're hitting those challenges head on, when do you know, a lot of those challenges you probably come across, you may have to deal with yourself individually. When is the time to reach out and work with others, work with people on your team, work with people in your community to help you overcome those challenges?
Good question. It obviously depends on the challenge, but I'd say for the most part, from what I've experienced personally, and from a lot of the folks that we profiled in the book, they really valued the input of others, whether it was asking a question or whether it was just saying, I'm thinking about this, or here's a situation that I have, let's talk this through, right? You don't have to do anything completely on your own by yourself. I think a great example of that is Todd Svoboda. And so, what he has done, it's his junior year at Division II Northern Kentucky. He was on an athletic scholarship. He was averaging 18 points, 11 rebounds a game for basketball. He was also a tennis player, and he was one of the conference champions in tennis. And at 6'8", he was like the literal big man on campus. But he had an option. Could he finish his career at Northern Kentucky, or could he take, because he was a chemical engineering major, could he take a more difficult road and follow this 3-2 program, 3 years at Northern Kentucky, then 2 years at the University of Kentucky, and try to walk on to the University of Kentucky men's basketball team, right? Rick Pitino, Jamal Mashburn, right? Like legendary program. And he had all sorts of people saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. But he leaned on his dad, and his dad was a chemical engineering major, and said, it'll be hard, but you will regret it if you don't do it. So I think on his own, right, he was getting so much negative feedback from other engineering majors, from even the coaches for Kentucky when they did the team photo in the preseason. All right, Todd, now you step out of the photo because we don't know if you're going to be on the team, right? He had all sorts of data coming to him to say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. But the fact that he also talked it through with his father, and his father gave him some encouragement, that helped him continue to go forward. So I'm a big fan of bouncing, ideas or problems, even if you don't have a solution, off other people and talk it through. And oftentimes they'll present a different way of seeing things, another resource, or they might just give you a word of encouragement that'll keep your mindset moving forward and actually solve the problem.
Yeah, and you brought up something else there too, where he went and he asked he sought advice from other people, but then he ended up relying on the advice from his father, somebody I'm sure that he relied on and looked up to, took his advice a little bit more than others, right? So how do you go about finding the right people to take that advice from too? You really have to have a small group of individuals that you trust.
That's true. Yeah, like almost having a brain trust. There's one thing, it's funny because I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she and I are actually just talking about not this exact topic, but it was working with other kids in your class on projects. And so we all had to do like great group projects in school. And like, what kind of people do you end up saying, I'd like to work with them? Why do you want to work with them? And part of that is somebody who is a linear thinker, right? And so they're not just all over the place with their thinking or running, ruled by emotion or self-interest or something like that. It's the people who say, okay, let's talk through this situation. What do we need to do? Let's map it out. Let's break it down. Let's talk it through. Let's go back and refine it. So I'd say when you are engaging with somebody that you're looking to give you some advice, obviously their experience is going to be, going to play a key role in doing it. Like, what background do they have? What do they bring to the table? But I think even more fundamental than that is, do they embrace critical thinking? Are they using our discernment, right? Or are they somebody who just says, well, just try this, or that sounds terrible, and they start, sobbing along with you. So I think that's a real thing of, if I have folks who I want to bounce an idea off of, I will basically, bounce it off the people who might not necessarily be subject matter experts, but they're good critical thinkers. They will ask me good questions to make me think of something else or send me in another direction, tell me go get more information. So that to me is one of the traits. I'd say the other one is that somebody isn't afraid to hurt your feelings, and they will tell you when you are misdirected, right? When I'm asking for feedback from people, I will say to them up front, I'm not looking for you to, at the end of this, say, that's a great idea, that's wonderful, that's super. Like, I'm looking for you to say, what can be done better from this? And so if you find people, even if they might not be the most pleasant people to go have a beer with, right, but they're going to be the biggest skeptics, that can really help you shape an idea, keep you out of trouble. It's better that they embarrass you and they make you feel bad than when you go and roll something out to the public, you get too far down the road, you're losing thousands of dollars, embarrassing people, embarrassing yourself, things like that. So I go after the linear thinkers and the people who are trusted and tough critics.
Yeah, and you have to be open-minded to that feedback too. You can't let it hurt you.
You know what? I've actually got, if you don't mind me, I'm going to say belaboring this point. You can edit this out if you want at any point.
No,
CJ,
go ahead, please. So I asked the question.
I work in a small office park, and down the hallway from me is a psychotherapist. And so I've talked with her about, people are coming to her as a trusted advisor all the time. Her name is Catherine Hoffman. She has several initials after her name with degrees and accreditations. I can't remember what all of them are. But I asked her, like, well, how do you give people direction? Like day after day after day, you're telling people do this, do this, do that. And she said, I'm not looking to tell people to do things. The main thing is I'm trying to get them to acquire an insight. And if they get insight into something themselves, they're way more driven to solve the problem and figure it out. I just don't go in and dictate to them. And so she talked about first you get a rapport with the person, right, that they can trust each other and go back and forth. Then you have some sort of assessment. So whether it's asking questions or is there a checklist or is there some best practice for you that you can look against? The other thing is, and I think this is a key one for folks, that person to change your behavior, humility precedes change your behavior. If you think I'm good, no one's going to teach me anything, I know exactly how this is going to work out. If you do not have the humility, you are going to run headlong into a brick wall at some point. Bob Duquette, my coach at Gannon, used to say sooner or later, like sooner or later, it's going to come back to bite you. And so that, having that assessment, having that humility, that leads to genuine self-reflection. And that's when you start talking to other people and listening to podcasts and reading books and attending conferences and getting a mentor and a coach, right? And having that person. And once you get to that point, that other person can then say to you, would you like my honest opinion, right? And if you can build up that whole scenario and get to that point where, would you like my honest opinion? And they will give it to you, that's where you're really going to advance. I always say out of context this, so, don't edit this and say, and here's my advice to people. Cheating is legal in business, right? And you're like, what do you mean? Like avoiding your taxes? No, but in school, you could not look off somebody else's paper. Hey, what's the answer to this? Hey, what advice would you have for me to write this essay? We're not allowed to do that in school. I went to Catholic schools, the nun would come by and wrap you on the hands with a ruler. But in the business world, you can ask somebody, I've got this problem, can you help me solve it? And they will say, sure, let's set up a meeting. Let's set up a call. But too many times in business, we think we have to go it alone. We think we're the only ones who have had this problem. But if you go and find the right people that fill all the criteria we talked about before, that's how you can avoid crises. That's how you can minimize crises. That's how you can turn difficulties into opportunities of victory.
So step 3, face challenges head on. What's step 4?
Yeah, step 4 ties in with that. So we call it no fuss, all muss. So no fuss means control your emotions, especially the negative ones, as you're seeking to advance your career. So if you got passed over a promotion that you thought you deserved, you can go into shutdown mode and say, I guess I'm not working hard anymore. But the best way to do it is to just shake your head for a moment in private and then resolve to work harder and perform better. That's a lot of these walk-ons that we talked with. They got cut before, and they could have said, I guess this sport isn't for me. I guess I'm not supposed to be doing this. But they just instead turned on themselves and doubled down on their efforts. So that's the no fuss, maintain emotional control, and get back to work. And then the must is the capital M, capital U, capital US. It stands for maximize unique strengths. And so most of the walk-ons that we profiled in the book, they were shorter, skinnier, and or slower than their more gifted scholarship athletes. And so what they had to do was figure out, what is my special ability? What is my special attitude? What is my special skill that I can bring to the team and maximize to the benefit of this team? And so one example of that is Brandon Landry. He's now actually the founder of Walk-On's Sports Bistro, which is a fast-growing restaurant chain in the Southeast. Drew Brees, who just retired from the New Orleans Saints, he's actually one of their partners. And so Brandon had relentlessness. And so he used that in order to to finally get a spot on the LSU men's basketball team. His first practice, he got the crap beat out of him. He's like, I'm going to go get stronger. And so he would put in extra work in order to get stronger, had a long career there, and then use that relentlessness to start his own business. He got turned down for 1 loan, 2 loans, 3 loans. It actually got up to 6 loans. And I said to him, if that 7th wouldn't have come through, what would you have done? He's like, there's no doubt in my mind. We'd have gone to an 8th bank and look for a loan from them. So again, that's step number 4. And that's why I say it ties in with the obstacles. You can get shut down emotionally when you run into something, but if you maintain your emotional control, again, no muss, and say, what can I do special to solve this? That's where you can move forward and achieve what you want.
What's the best way to maintain that emotional control? When you were speaking with the walk-ons you interviewed, did they provide you with any methods?
Yeah, my tongue-in-cheek answer is Prozac, but that wasn't what people used. So there were a handful of things that they did, and that's the one thing. There wasn't a necessarily one-size-fits-all answer. One was eye on the prize. And so they said, I really want to get to this goal that I have of, playing on this sports team, or, being able to, walk onto the University or University of Kansas or University of Kentucky basketball team. And so they said, I know I'm going to have to go through this. I just have to endure it. And so on the other end of this, I'm going to come out stronger for it. And boy, am I going to have a great story to tell. Right. And that's actually when I went through my cancer treatments, that's what I tried to do. It was like, oh, this is long. And I was like, what stories can I gather? What unique people can I run into and actually turn this into something that's different? So that's one. Another is, and tying in with the emotional control is, we had Megan Lightfoot, who we profiled. She walked onto the UCLA rowing team. She has a great phrase that I've used ever since I interviewed her. And she said, keep your head in the boat. Right? So while you're out and you've got blisters on your hands and your knees and elbows are aching, salt water splashing in your face, the other team is way ahead of you, and the boat is rocking. You have got to make sure you keep your head in the boat and just focus on what you need to do, right? Instead of getting caught up in the big picture and, oh my gosh, how terrible this is, all I've got to do is this stroke, and I've got to do it again. And I've got to do it this way, and I've got to do it at this pace. If you really break it down to what things you need to do, get out of the spot and not be fretting about your situation, quickly turn it into what actions can I take to take me a step forward, that's something that's going to help you as well. So I really like that about keep your head in the boat. And then the last thing I'll say, as I touched on earlier about the encouraging, it was really something how so many of these walk-ons had encouragement, whether it was from a coach, a teacher, whether it was from a fellow student, or a teammate, somebody who said to them, I really like what you're doing, right? This means something to me. And so that's why I encourage folks. I was actually just telling a younger colleague of this, a colleague of mine yesterday, like taking a few minutes each week to sincerely tell somebody, you did this thing and I thought it was great. That really, really goes a long way, because you really never know the spot that somebody else is in. Are they on the edge of quitting, and something that you say or don't say or just ignore can have them go, I guess I don't need to do this. But boy, you get that word of encouragement from somebody, a sincere word of encouragement, that can be the fuel that helps keep somebody going forward. So I'd say those are some of the elements that went into how folks got through those most difficult times, how they controlled their emotions.
Yeah, you really never know what someone is going through. And sometimes that little thing you say to them at some point during their day really changes them.
Can I tell you a silly one that really will reflect poorly
Sure.
on me, but I'm happy to share it with you? So
Sure.
I told you I worked at Jameson Publishing for 17 years. There was an editor who we hired down at our Pittsburgh office. I'm in Erie, Pennsylvania, so it's 2 hours south. And so I would go down there at least once a month and work with the team down there. So when I announced I was leaving Jameson to go be a business coach, some people would say like, hey, here's one thing that you did or said, and here's what kind of stuck with me. So this was a woman who was going to have her first child, and she was very, very conscientious. And she was saying to me like how worried she is about, am I going to be able to take care of the baby? Am I going to be able to feed him? Like all those things. I don't know how to do this, and like really feeling bad about what she did. And so I just told her honestly, and again, this will sound terrible, reflect poorly on me, but I actually said to her, there are people with far fewer teeth than you who have successfully raised children. You're going to be fine. Like I said it almost as a joke, as a funny thing.
Yeah.
But she brought it up years later, like when I was leaving, and she said, you have no idea how that encouraged me and lifted my spirits. I was like, yeah, that's true. Like I'm doing all this planning, all this work. There are people who don't even do any of that.
Yeah.
And their kids turn out just fine. And so she said, she played that back to him like, did I really say that? Like, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible and terrible. But the fact that I'm glad I said it, like, I know it could be offensive to some folks, but the fact that I said it really encouraged her. And I, didn't even know. I was just stating a fact that I thought to her. But yeah, you never know when a kind word to somebody, what impact it's going to have on them, big or small.
So we've gone through steps 1 through 4. Now we're on to step 5.
Yeah, step 5 is make them throw you out of the gym. The emphasis on them. It's not like you need to have some sort of bad conduct and make somebody throw you out of the gymnasium. So what happens is, and so the subheadline for this is never, ever, 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 ever quit, right? And so too many times people throw themselves out of the gym, right? Instead of saying, I'm going to go try out for that team. I'm going to walk into that gymnasium. I'm going to say to the coach, I'd like to try out for your team. Too many times people throw themselves out. They say, I'm not good enough. I'm not tall enough. I'm not sure if I'm going to have the time to do it. And they quit on their dream before they ever started. So that's why this is step 5. And to your point earlier about how do you have sustained success, it's by never quitting. It's by always going through and what were the building blocks that got to you where you are, and keep doing it and keep getting better every day and keep working just as hard as you did before, no less than what you did. And so it's a very simple fundamental step, but too many times people start going down the path and they reach a perseverance stage and they just say, this is too hard, and they end up quitting on themselves. And so that's what we really found out with these walk-ons that we featured in the book. They all had multiple times where they thought, why am I doing this? Why am I, putting in this extra work? Why, I'm not even having a scholarship and I have to work a part-time job and nobody on the team talks to me and the coach doesn't know my name, all sorts of reasons to say why you shouldn't do this. But they kept saying, I'm going to keep going. And looking back, they say, man, am I glad I did. I've thought 25 times during my 4 years about quitting, right, is what people would say to me. But boy, I'm glad I never sold myself short. I proved that I can do it. And they talked about how that really carries on in their professional career, that they say, if I could do that thing that all sorts of people dreamed of, and it seemed like I had no chance of making it, boy, I was 5'11". Everybody else was 6'8". Now here I am in the working world. It doesn't matter how tall you are, right? And so these lessons that I have can really carry over, and they're really happy that they did it. And the one thing I always say when I wrap up the 5 steps of the walk-on method is that all 5 of these steps are within your power. Right? It doesn't take any special skills or knowledge to take a big shot or prepare with passion. And you don't need an advanced degree to control your emotions or maximize your unique strengths. So if folks want to increase their knowledge, skills, and competence, if they want to change their trajectory of their business and their career, they can start thinking and acting like a walk-on and following these 5 steps.
What's the most difficult step, do you think, for the walk-on method? Does it depend on the person? Out of all the people you interviewed, did it seem like there was one that really was the most difficult?
Good question. I'd say from both as a collegiate standpoint and as a professional standpoint, a lot of it was taking that big shot, right? Because you think to yourself, who am I to think that I can actually do this thing, right, and accomplish this thing? And so, who am I to start a business? Who am I to think I can run an insurance agency? Who am I? And, I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about some of the walk-ons in the book. After 22 years in the sales field, that I can then go and start coaching other people on sales. I can coach youths in terms of what it takes for them to get ahead. Yogi Roth is featured in our book, and, he had a successful walk-on career at Pitt, had a coaching opportunity, but he said, long story short, I want to be on a big network broadcasting football games. That's what I want to do. And so somebody would say, who are you? You're from Dalton, Pennsylvania, right? That's not exactly the path to Hollywood. And so I think it's that initial step that folks think, maybe this isn't the path for me, or boy, that seems way far out there. Look at the things I'd have to turn my back on in order to go for that. That tends to be the hardest, most difficult one, because we will sit there and dream and think and hope about something. But, if you do the Ben Franklin list, here are the reasons why I should do it, here are the reasons why I shouldn't. The why I shouldn't is always considerably longer than the why I should list. And so that's, I think, for folks to get started on this path is the most difficult thing, to be honest with you.
Taking that big shot, how big does it have to be? I mean, if you pick, let's say you're in your head, you pick that big shot, should you always try to strive a little bit higher than that? How do you find that ground?
Good question. And it's really up to the person. And so a big shot doesn't need to be, I need to be the richest person in the world, right? Really only one person can do that. It can be something as I say small, I'm putting quotes around small. Like an example, back to our, tech industry days, when I worked at Business Solutions and we started getting involved in the group that I now work for, the Retail Solutions Providers Association, they gave out awards for the most popular vendors. And so we weren't very well accepted because we didn't have a lot of relationships built. And so we set a goal in terms of, man, it'd be nice to get one of those awards, right? Just to get one of those. And so, after a couple of years, suddenly we get the silver award and we're like, oh, wow, great. Hey, it's nice to be recognized. The next year we get gold. A couple more years we get gold. And then they had something called the gold medallion for the best overall vendor because we had won in our category. And we get the gold medallion. And so you're like, oh, well, how about that? It was a 6-year goal. And so again, nobody listening to this podcast would say, yeah, my goal was to have, be the gold medallion vendor inside of the RSPA. But that was something we as a group wanted to do. And so it really depends on, your own personal situation, and you can set mini goals along the way as well. So I'd say whatever you want, but do not sell yourself short, right? Figure out something. And there's also one of my favorite books is called Getting to Plan B. And it talks about you set this initial goal. On the way, as you learn, you get advice and you change kind of the things that maybe you might want. Your plan B ends up being better than what plan A originally was. But by all means, start heading down that path and figure out what is the best thing for you. Morph your plan along the way, but get to a point where you're happy, where you're helping other people and serving others.
And that goal has to be realistic too, right? Like the goal you mentioned before, becoming the richest man in the world. There's only, one person who can accomplish that. So it has to be something that's relatively realistic.
Yes, I'd say relatively realistic, but I would say stretch your thinking. Don't start small. Again, getting back to that Yogi Roth. Yogi did not say, I want to be the best football player in Dalton, Pennsylvania. That would have been fine. He actually went to a Pitt Notre Dame football game and in Pittsburgh and got in the car and said to his dad, I want to go play football at Pitt. Dad's looking at him like, dude, you're like, 13 years old, you barely play on your current team. Like, what are you going to do in order to get there? Like, that seemed crazy.
Yeah.
But he worked his way into it, right? He thought, what things do I need to do? And saw working in the weight room, working on his skills, going to camps. He broke it down into all those actionable steps. So I guess that's the whole thing is, you can't say, I'm going to get to the moon, in my 1992 Geo Prism. That's not realistic. But I'd say there are a lot of things that can truly be realistic if you really want to work for them and can make things happen. Really, like, break it down and start moving forward on those actions.
Yeah, and you really got to put that plan together and try to gather those resources, making those connections to see what exactly you need to do to get to that goal of yours.
Right. And what are the first few steps? That's, when I talk with folks about building up plans, even if it's a long range plan, you don't have to get A through Z. Just figure out A, B, C, and D, and then start executing on A, B, C, and D. And then once you get, in the C, D range, you can figure out the next letters of the alphabet that you have to go down the path of. You don't have to come up with some big, gory, unbelievable, well spelled out, well thought out plan, because again, the only time I ever quote Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And
right.
So, that's one thing that I've learned is when you have an idea, throw it out to the market, test and measure, and then adapt. And those are really the strongest solutions that come along the way.
Jim, if people want to learn more about the walk-on method, where can they purchase the book?
Sure. Yeah, you can purchase the book. It's available on Amazon in paperback or ebook format. Just do a search for the walk-on method and it'll come up that way. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Just do a search for Jim Roddy. You can also find me on Twitter as well. Those are my two most active social media channels. And then also anybody who's listening to this, if they want to shoot me an email, it's jim@jimroddycba.com. So JIMRODD as in dog, Y, and then ABC backwards, CBA. So jimroddycba.com. And I will send you a couple things. One, I'll send you a free chapter from the book, and then I'll also send you the list of walk-on workplace do's and don'ts. So we take a lot of the things that you and I've talked about, the attitudes and the approaches that these folks had as student athletes and as professionals, and we break those down at a very specific, what are some certain things that you can do in your workplace that are going to really follow through on that walk-on attitude, that walk-on mindset. And that's a big thing about the walk-on method. It's not just some state of mind or some I'm meditating on this thing. It's like, here's some simple things that you can do every single day. They might be difficult emotionally, but they're little steps that you can take in order to be a standout performer and end up achieving whatever you want.
Jim, thanks for coming on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, CJ. Pleasure to talk with you.